The clock on the restaurant wall ticked lazily, the sound nearly lost beneath the clatter of dishes, the buzz of customers, and the hum of quiet conversations. It was another long evening at the downtown restaurant, and Ava Johnson moved swiftly between tables, balancing trays with practiced ease, her smile never fading even as exhaustion pressed heavily on her shoulders. The air smelled of roasted meat, fresh bread, and stress. Every table she served added a little more weight to her aching feet, yet her kindness never wavered. She greeted each guest with warmth, refilled glasses before they emptied, and apologized even for mistakes that weren't her own. But standing behind the counter, arms crossed and eyes sharp, was Mr. Carter, her manager, a man who found fault in perfection itself. "You missed a spot on table 3, he muttered as she passed. "Your tone's too soft. Speak clearly." His words were sharp, cutting through the noise like a knife. Ava simply nodded, keeping her composure. She had learned that arguing only made things worse. The other waiters exchanged quick, pitying glances, but said nothing. They all knew that Mr. Carter's temper was unpredictable. Ava didn't blame them. They had families to feed too. She had her own reasons for staying silent. Her mother's hospital bills were piling up, and quitting wasn't an option. Every paycheck mattered. Every tip was a small victory. When the night rush hit, the restaurant filled to capacity. Ava moved faster, weaving between tables like a dancer, trying to stay in rhythm with chaos. "Table 5 needs water. Ava, the kitchen's waiting on your order. Ava, where's that check?" Mr. Carter's voice echoed from every direction, his tone growing sharper each time. Still, she answered politely, "Yes, sir," never letting her frustration show. But inside, she felt the sting of humiliation. It wasn't just the extra workload, it was the way he spoke to her, as if she were invisible. Yet what no one noticed was the quiet strength behind her soft voice. Ava carried her burdens like invisible armor. She had learned long ago that life rarely gave second chances, and kindness was the only weapon she had against cruelty. As the evening stretched on, her back began to ache and her hands trembled slightly from fatigue. A small spill on the counter drew Mr. Carter's immediate attention. "Unbelievable," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You can't even handle a simple task without making a mess." The comment stung, but Ava forced a small smile. "I'll clean it right away," she replied calmly, wiping the counter with quick, steady hands. A customer sitting nearby gave her a sympathetic look, but Ava pretended not to notice. She didn't want pity. She wanted peace. Beneath the bright restaurant lights, her face remained composed, though her eyes carried a quiet sadness, the kind only visible to those who cared enough to look closely. Outside the large glass windows, the city moved on without her, cars rushing, lights flickering, people laughing. For a brief moment, Ava allowed herself to imagine another life, one where her mother was healthy, where she worked in a place that valued her, where she didn't have to smile through pain. But dreams were luxuries she couldn't afford. "Ava." Mr. Carter's voice snapped her back to reality. "Focus." She nodded again, forcing her thoughts away. The night dragged on, each minute feeling heavier than the last. When the final customers left and the chairs were stacked, the staff gathered their things. Mr. Carter gave a final order to clean faster, his tone dismissive. Ava stayed late to finish wiping tables, humming softly to herself, a small tune her mother used to sing. It was her way of holding on to peace amid the noise. As she stepped outside into the cool night air, her reflection in the restaurant window caught her eye. She saw a woman who looked tired but not broken, weary but still standing. She took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill her lungs, and whispered to herself, "Tomorrow will be better." She didn't know that this simple belief, this quiet strength, was about to lead her into a moment that would change everything. Somewhere, in the shadow of the night, fate was already setting the stage for the next chapter, one that would test not her patience, but her courage, and revealed to the world that true dignity cannot be destroyed, no matter how hard life tries. Friday evenings were always busy at the restaurant, but that night felt different. The crowd was larger, the noise louder, and the air thicker with stress. Every table was filled, and the kitchen buzzed like a beehive trying to keep up with endless orders. Ava Johnson moved quickly between tables, balancing plates with one hand and refilling glasses with the other. Her coworker had called in sick, leaving her to handle 3 tables alone. Still, she smiled at every customer, apologized when food came late, and worked faster than anyone else could. Her apron was stained, her feet ached, but her heart remained steady. Across the room, her manager, Mr. Carter, stood near the counter, arms crossed, watching her like a hawk waiting to pounce. He was in one of his moods, impatient, irritated, and ready to find fault in anything. Ava was delivering an order to a family of 4 when it happened. She placed the plates down carefully, double-checked the drinks, and turned to leave when she heard her name thunder through the restaurant. "Ava?" Mr. Carter's voice sliced through the chatter, loud enough for everyone to hear. The entire room went quiet. Forks paused mid-air, and conversations stopped mid-sentence. Ava froze, her heart thudding painfully in her chest. She turned around, forcing a polite smile. "Yes, sir?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Mr. Carter held up a small slip of paper, the order she had just sent to the kitchen. "You wrote table 7 instead of table 8, he snapped. "Do you even read what you're writing?" The mistake was tiny, barely worth mentioning, but his tone made it sound unforgivable. The customers looked uncomfortable. One of Ava's coworkers shifted uneasily behind the counter, but no one dared to intervene. Ava's hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it by clasping them in front of her apron. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I'll fix it right away." Her calmness seemed to irritate him even more. "You're sorry every day, Ava," he barked, his voice echoing off the walls. "Do you think sorry pays the bills? Maybe if you focused for once, we wouldn't be cleaning up after your mistakes." A few customers whispered among themselves, shaking their heads in disbelief. Ava felt her cheeks burn, her throat tightening. She wanted to disappear, to run into the kitchen and cry where no one could see her, but she stood her ground. "I'll correct it immediately, sir," she said again, her tone steady, even though her voice wavered at the end. Mr. Carter turned away with a scoff, muttering something under his breath, and the restaurant's noise slowly returned. But the moment hung heavy in the air, like a storm that had only half passed. As Ava walked toward the kitchen, blinking back tears, she noticed that someone had been watching her, a man sitting alone in the corner booth near the window. He was quietly sipping his coffee, his expression unreadable. Unlike the other guests, he hadn't looked away during the scene. His eyes followed her movements, not with judgment, but with interest and something else, concern. He had been watching her all evening, noticing how she smiled at customers, even when she was clearly exhausted, how she handled rude remarks with patience, and how her manager's words seemed to slide off her back, though he could tell they hurt deeply. There was something about her calmness that caught his attention, a quiet dignity he rarely saw in people anymore. Ava didn't notice his gaze as she disappeared into the kitchen, her hands gripping the tray tightly to steady herself. Behind the closed doors, she leaned against the counter, taking slow, deep breaths. Her coworker, a kind young man named Leo, approached her carefully. "You okay?" he asked. Ava gave a small, forced smile. "I'm fine," she said, though her eyes glistened. "It's just another day." She didn't want pity. She had learned long ago that sympathy often faded faster than the pain it tried to comfort. Out in the dining area, the mysterious man continued to watch. When Mr. Carter walked by his table, he noticed the man's expensive watch, his tailored suit, subtle signs of wealth that didn't quite fit the casual setting. The man caught Mr. Carter's glance, but said nothing, simply offering a polite nod before returning his attention to the table where Ava had been serving. Something about his calm presence felt unsettling, as if he was not just another customer, but someone who belonged to a different world entirely. As the night went on, Ava kept working, her smile returning, though weaker now. She didn't know that the man in the corner had seen everything, the humiliation, the patience, the quiet strength. Nor did she know that he wasn't just any diner seeking a late-night meal. He had come there for a reason, though fate had made their meeting look like chance. And before the night was over, that quiet stranger would change everything she thought she knew about herself. Her job, and the cruel man who believed power, gave him the right to break others. As the evening rush finally began to fade, the restaurant grew quieter. The clinking of glasses softened, and the last few customers lingered over their meals, while the tired staff started clearing tables. The once noisy space now carried a calm hum, the kind that follows chaos. At the corner booth near the window, the man who had watched everything all night finally placed his napkin on the table and stood. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and a calm, steady expression. His clothes were simple, a black jacket, a white shirt, and polished shoes. Yet there was something about his posture, the quiet confidence in his movements, that made people instinctively step aside. When he walked toward the counter, even the air seemed to shift. Mr. Carter, who was counting receipts behind the register, looked up with a polite but forced smile. "Everything all right, sir?" he asked, trying to sound professional. The man's voice was calm, deep, and measured. "Excuse me," he said, "but that waitress, the one you've been shouting at all evening, is she always treated this way?" The question caught Mr. Carter off guard. He blinked, unsure of what to say, then straightened his shoulders, as if to reclaim authority. "She's slow and careless," he said stiffly, his tone defensive. "I expect professionalism in my staff. If she can't handle pressure, that's not my problem." The man studied him quietly, his dark eyes sharp yet unreadable. There was no anger in them, just a heavy silence that made Mr. Carter shift uncomfortably. After a moment, the man gave a small nod and said nothing more. Without another glance, he turned and began walking toward the dining area. Mr. Carter frowned, curiosity and unease flickering across his face. Something about that man felt unsettling, as if he wasn't just a customer, but someone far more important. Across the room, Ava Johnson was wiping down one of the last tables, her hands moving in slow, practiced circles. Her back ached, her feet throbbed, but she kept working quietly, wanting to finish before closing time. She didn't notice the man approaching until his shadow stretched across the table. "You shouldn't let people speak to you like that," came his voice, calm yet firm. Ava looked up sharply, and for the first time that night, her tired eyes brightened. A small, genuine smile spread across her face, softening her features. "You didn't tell me you were coming," she said gently, her voice lowering into a whisper that carried warmth and surprise. Around them, the restaurant seemed to freeze. A waiter stopped stacking plates. A couple at the corner table looked up, and even Mr. Carter, still behind the counter, turned sharply toward them. His eyes widened in confusion as he saw Ava standing before the man with a look that was no longer weary but full of familiarity, the kind only shared by two people who belonged in each other's lives. You know him?" Mr. Carter asked, his voice cracking slightly as he stepped closer. Ava turned to face him, her expression calm but steady. "Yes," she said softly, glancing back at the man beside her. "He's my husband." The words landed like a thunderclap. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Even the faint music playing through the restaurant's speakers seemed to vanish into silence. Mr. Carter's face drained of color as realization dawned. His eyes darted between Ava and the man, now standing tall beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. A dozen thoughts raced through Mr. Carter's mind. Who was this man? Why had Ava never mentioned him? And more importantly, why did his presence carry such power, such quiet authority, that even the air felt heavy around him. The staff exchanged nervous glances, whispering quietly. The man Ava's husband didn't need to raise his voice or declare who he was. His mere presence demanded respect. Mr. Carter swallowed hard, trying to regain control. I didn't realize, he stammered. The man turned to him slowly, his eyes steady. You didn't need to realize who she was, he said calmly. You only needed to treat her with basic decency. His tone wasn't harsh, but the words hit with the weight of truth. Mr. Carter stood frozen, unsure whether to apologize or defend himself, but deep down, he knew neither would matter. The staff watched silently, tension thick in the air. Ava, still composed, gave her husband a small, grateful smile. It's all right, she whispered. Let's just go. But he didn't move right away. Instead, he gave one final look around the restaurant, at the tables she had served, the coworkers who had stayed quiet, and the manager who had mistaken cruelty for authority. Then, gently taking Ava's hand, he said, You don't belong in a place that forgets the value of kindness. As they walked toward the door, whispers followed them, the kind of whispers that carried awe and regret. Mr. Carter remained standing behind the counter, his chest tight, realizing too late that the woman he had humiliated all evening wasn't just another employee. She was someone whose dignity couldn't be broken, not even by his harshest words. And as the door closed behind her, the quiet echo of her husband's calm voice lingered in the air, a reminder that respect, once lost, is far harder to earn back than authority ever will be. The restaurant was frozen in stunned silence. Every waiter, cook, and customer seemed to hold their breath as the tall man in the black jacket stood beside Ava, his calm voice cutting through the heavy air. Whispers began to ripple quietly among the staff. Who was this man, and why did his presence command such quiet respect? Mr. Carter, still standing near the counter, tried to steady himself, but his hands trembled slightly. His confident tone from earlier was gone, replaced with nervous curiosity. The man turned slowly toward the onlookers and spoke with the same steady voice that had silenced the room. My name is David Johnson, he said. The name rolled through the room like a quiet storm. One of the younger waiters gasped softly, recognizing it immediately. Within seconds, everyone knew. David Johnson, the man who owned one of the biggest restaurant chains in the country, the same man whose businesses were featured in magazines, who was known for transforming small diners into world-class restaurants. He was not only successful, but respected for his fairness and generosity. And now, that very man stood in their modest workplace, not as an investor or a critic, but as the husband of the waitress their manager had humiliated all evening. Mr. Carter's face turned pale. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. Finally, he stammered, I didn't know, sir. I didn't realize who she was. His voice trembled, each word weaker than the last. David's expression didn't change, his eyes calm but sharp, fixed on Mr. Carter with a look that was neither angry nor forgiving, just deeply disappointed. You didn't need to know who she was, he said quietly, but his tone carried a weight that filled every corner of the room. You only needed to remember that kindness costs nothing. The words hung in the air like truth carved into stone. Mr. Carter swallowed hard, his pride shrinking under the weight of those simple, undeniable words. He looked down, avoiding David's gaze, realizing that every person in the restaurant had just witnessed the one thing he'd never experienced before: humility. Ava stood beside her husband, her hands folded nervously in front of her. She wanted the moment to end, not out of anger, but because she didn't want to see anyone shamed, not even the man who had treated her so cruelly. Her heart was gentle, even after all she had endured. David, she whispered softly, her voice barely audible. It's all right. But David shook his head slightly. No, he said. It's not. His tone wasn't harsh. It was filled with quiet conviction. You've worked hard, Ava. You've carried yourself with dignity when others forgot what that means. You deserve better. You always did. He reached for her hand, his gesture tender yet firm, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. In that silent exchange, there was a story of love, of patience, of two people who had built a life of respect in a world that often forgot the meaning of it. The staff watched in awe, some exchanging guilty glances, others silently admiring Ava's strength. The truth of who she was, and who she was married to, was shocking, but what truly moved everyone was her grace. She hadn't once raised her voice or defended herself that night, yet the truth had defended her better than any argument could. Mr. Carter tried to speak again, his words stumbling. "I didn't mean to, But David lifted a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Don't explain," he said calmly. "I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to remind you that the way you treat people, especially those who work under you, says more about your character than any success ever will." The silence that followed was so deep that even the faint hum of the kitchen machinery seemed to fade. Every employee felt the truth of his words settle deep inside. Ava squeezed David's hand gently, silently asking him to let it go. He turned to her, his features softening instantly. "Let's go home," he said quietly, and she nodded, relief washing over her. As they turned to leave, the restaurant staff stepped aside, their eyes following them with a mix of respect and shame. For the first time that night, Ava held her head high, not out of pride but because she had finally been seen for who she truly was, a woman of strength, humility, and quiet grace. Behind them, Mr. Carter stood frozen, his reflection staring back from the glass counter. In that reflection, he saw not a powerful manager, but a man who had let arrogance blind him to simple humanity. As the door closed softly behind the couple, the air in the restaurant seemed different, quieter, heavier, yet somehow clearer. No one spoke for several moments. Then one of the waiters, still staring at the door, whispered, "He was right." Mr. Carter didn't respond. He just stood there, hearing David's words echo in his mind. Kindness costs nothing. That night, long after everyone had left, he sat alone at the counter, replaying every moment, every harsh word he'd spoken, every time he'd chosen pride over decency. It was a lesson he would never forget, one taught not through anger or punishment, but through the quiet power of truth and dignity. The sun rose over the city the next morning, casting soft light on the streets that had witnessed the events of the night before. Inside the small apartment she shared with her mother, Ava Johnson prepared for a new day, but this time not for the restaurant where she had been humiliated. Her uniform hung neatly on a chair, folded for the last time. There was no anger in her heart, no bitterness, only peace. That chapter of her life had closed, and another was quietly waiting to begin. David had asked her the night before if she wanted to rest, but she had simply smiled and said, "I'd rather work just somewhere I'm valued," and so when she stepped into one of David's restaurants that morning, it was not as the owner's wife, but as a new trainer for young staff members, people just beginning their journey in hospitality. Her first day was calm, the atmosphere respectful, the air filled with laughter instead of tension. The staff greeted her warmly, unaware of her story, but they could feel something in her presence, a quiet authority, the kind that doesn't need to demand respect to earn it. Ava taught with patience, guiding new waiters with kindness instead of criticism. When someone made a mistake, she didn't scold. She smiled and said, "It's all right. We learn from doing, not from fear." Her words carried the wisdom of experience, and soon the staff began to look up to her, not because of who her husband was, but because of who she was, someone who understood struggle, who knew how it felt to be unseen, yet never stopped shining. As weeks turned into months, Ava's work began to change the tone of the place. Customers often left compliments about how warm and genuine the service felt. The restaurant became known not just for its food, but for its heart. David watched from a distance, proud yet silent, allowing her to grow in her own light. He never introduced her as his wife, only as our lead trainer, because Ava wanted to earn every bit of respect on her own, and she did. Her humility became her strength, her kindness, her power. Meanwhile, back at the old restaurant, things had shifted. The gossip about the night David Johnson walked in had spread through the city's restaurant circle like wildfire. Mr. Carter had tried to continue as before, but something inside him had changed. His staff no longer looked at him the same way, and he found himself thinking about the look on Ava's face when she stood beside her husband, not proud, not vengeful, but dignified. The memory haunted him, not as guilt, but as a mirror. Eventually, he resigned quietly, choosing to leave rather than continue leading with pride that now felt empty. Months later, he met an old friend at a cafe and spoke softly, almost as if confessing. "That woman," he said, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly, "taught me more about dignity than any manager's manual ever could." His friend looked at him in surprise. "A waitress taught you?" Mr. Carter smiled faintly. "No," he replied. "A teacher disguised as a waitress did." His words lingered, a quiet truth he carried for the rest of his life. Ava never heard about his reflection, but she wouldn't have judged him anyway. She had long since let go of resentment. To her, every hardship had meaning, every cruel word, every tear, every long night spent wondering if she was good enough. "Life doesn't break you to destroy you," she once told one of her trainees. "It breaks you to build you stronger, to show you who you really are." Those who worked with her listened closely, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. She had become not just a teacher of language and service, but of humanity. In time, her story spread beyond the restaurant walls. Customers shared it with friends. Inspired by the tale of the humble waitress who had faced cruelty with grace and taught her own manager the meaning of respect, newspapers wrote small features about her journey, calling her the woman who redefined dignity. Yet, Ava never sought fame. When people praised her, she simply smiled and said, it wasn't courage, it was faith. Faith that good people still existed. Faith that kindness could outlast cruelty. Faith that no pain, however deep, was ever wasted. As for the restaurant, where it all began, it eventually came under new management, younger, kinder, and inspired by the story of the woman who once worked there. They changed its culture completely, turning it into a place of encouragement instead of fear. And on the quiet evenings, when the lights dimmed and the last customers left, sometimes the new staff would share stories about Ava, the woman who had once walked those same floors, carrying trays with tired hands, but an unbreakable spirit. She was no longer just a former waitress or a business owner's wife. She had become a living reminder that true power doesn't come from titles or wealth, but from grace, the kind that stays steady even when the world is unkind. Her life was proof that dignity, once tested, can become the strongest armor of all.